Alright, hello everybody. This is Dean from Motion Media, and today we're going to talk about a plugin for 3ds Max and Vray called SolidRocks. And in short, SolidRocks helps you optimize everything about Vray so that you can obtain fast renders both for animation and for still frames. However, it takes over all of Vray and makes changes to everything. So this is going to be a first of a two-part series. We're going to kind of have an overview and look at how the tool works on this video, and then on the second one we will talk about and look at how to do animation. So let's first open up our render dialog. Anybody who watches my videos knows that I use Vray primarily one way, which is using adaptive subdivision, and then when working in production mode I'm at a max rate of 2, and then I like the brute force because I primarily do a lot of animation, and brute force ensures that you're going to get a solid solution on all of your GI. And then I use that in the very low mode during production, and then high animation during animation, also with this turned up to 4. And basically with those two settings I can do basically anything I want. However, just recently I got a job wherein I had to do several videos of photoreal interiors and exteriors, and all of a sudden this method did not work at all. Now, it worked in the sense of giving me a good looking render. However, it didn't work in the sense that those renders were 8 to 10 hours long and were not going to work inside this production window. So I've known about SolidRocks for some time. I'm going to open it up right here. And I've always paid attention to it. However, I never purchased it because I just didn't need it, and this is a situation where I needed it. So I bought it. I learned it in a very short time. I've used it now for several animations, and it's really fantastic. So let me show you what I know, and we'll go from there. So this is the interface, and you can see I just made a little place for me on my toolbar here. I did that using their video. It's very simple. But one thing I want to look at before I go any further at all is you'll notice that my Vray settings just changed when I opened up SolidRocks. So let me close it. Watch this area right here. I'm going to close SolidRocks, and you notice everything goes back to what I had it. So this can be a little confusing. So for instance, when you start using SolidRocks for a particular scene and you want to keep or embed these settings, you must save Max when SolidRocks is open, and then it will store all these settings. So for instance, if you use a machine that has SolidRocks and then you take it somewhere else where you're going to launch it for a render, you want to make sure that you save all of these settings into Max. The other way you could do this, of course, is by, once you have your settings correct, you can go down here and save it as a preset. But just keep that in mind. When SolidRocks is open, it's controlling Vray and everything's different. If we close it, it changes back to what our original settings are, unless we've saved as while SolidRocks is open. Hopefully that's not confusing. Okay, so when I render this scene as is, by the way, let's just look at the scene. This is just based on a real piece of architecture in Tokyo called a Fukai house, and I didn't go into a great amount of detail of getting it exactly the same. However, it is based on it. What it does have, though, is a significant amount of detail that you would find in some architectural photoreal renderings for an interior and an exterior. And that's what I really wanted here, so we could really try this thing out. So, SolidRocks in general, and I'm not going to go through every single thing here, but in general, it works by controlling the resolution. Okay, done right here. and that is queuing off of what we had in our dialog box. And it's also dealing with a quality level that goes from fast draft all the way up to ultra. Medium seems to be a really nice place to work when you're doing production. When you're doing work. And then we're going to get to these settings when it comes to rendering and animation, but depending on still frame needs, I've found good works great in most cases, production looks great. However, there is a significant increase in render time, so for the moment we're going to leave it there. So you have, in addition to that, you have presets for interiors and exteriors. I'm using Vray 2.0, and so I'm using the Vray interior, Vray 2 interior, which works really nicely. In addition to that, there are several different method shortcuts here that you can use. So, in my opinion, and I went through all of these to test them, but for what I needed, the best solution was this one, which was irradiance and light cache and some AO, or ambient occlusion. And you can see there are several different methods here, each one for just whatever needs you may have. So in addition to that, you have your rendering section here. You have a preview window, which is nice. Let's just do that. So I'm clicking for it to do a little mini preview so you can get a feel for how long it takes. Not very long at all. Something that I really do like about this is, okay, now we have our preview. What's really nice is when you're using Vray cameras, for me, most of the time I use them in neutral mode, and I set it to the white balance to white. We'll look at it here. Okay, usually I have it in neutral, and then my white balance is white. Now I've already prepared this one, but you know what? Let's just turn it to neutral here, and you can see I've done my own shutter speed. So let's do a mini preview again, and again I just switched my camera back to its default setting. So let's see what it comes up with here. And it really works fast on this preview, which is nice. On really complex scenes, lots going on in this particular scene. Lots of reflections, lots of glass, lots of blurry reflections, etc. Okay, so there's our preview. So you can also then do an auto exposure and a white balance. So if we do the exposure, it's going to think about it, and then it brings up this nice comparison to show us what our setting was in terms of the shutter speed and what our setting should be according to SolidWorks. Now, I've noticed that in my own opinion, okay, so here we go. So this is what I had, and this is what it says it should be. And you'll notice it's going to change my shutter speed here. It was 200, now it's 52. So you can say apply new shutter speed, and now you get those settings in here. You can see we're still at a neutral white balance. That's what this next button is for. And this is our white balance. So basically SolidWorks is figuring out what the white balance should be for the camera, and then does the same thing, comes up with a before and after, so you can kind of take a peek at it, and then makes the adjustment if you like it. Okay, so you can see here's our before and here's our after. Not a large amount of difference, but enough to make it so that your whites are white, and that's why that's really necessary. So even just on a simple end, that little tool right there is incredibly helpful. That's a really huge time saver, and gets you into a really great place so that you're seeing your scene in a really correct manner. And now, in my own opinion, and I started to say this before, I feel like sometimes in these scenes SolidWorks is choosing a low shutter speed or letting in too much light. So I've noticed that I've been setting my shutter speed a little bit higher, in some cases double in some cases quadruple. In this one, I had it set at 200. And that's because I was just getting too many blowouts, and I wanted a little bit more, not so much contrast between white and dark areas. Okay, so the next area, again, this just selects or allows you to control different aspects of V-Ray. I'm going to use the default. I haven't used these too much. In this section here, and I should say, you can close up this whole thing here. I've got just stuff open. But you can open all of these different windows, and I've just gotten used to working with them all on. And of course you can reduce the UI so that this isn't such a burden while you're working. I haven't really gotten into this area. I've played with it just a little bit, but for what I'm using it for, I just haven't had a need to use it just yet. This is showing me what the settings are in V-Ray. And then these are various globals that, again, I have let V-Ray, or I have let SolidRocks control. I do want to mention this part here, optimization. On this auto glossies, what this means is you can set all of these default settings that SolidRocks is using, and you can save them afterwards and what have you. But if you look here, and this is really handy, if I turn on auto glossies here, what's going to happen is it's going to go through all of my materials and force all of the subdivisions on the materials. Let's just open that up so that's clear. Let's close this real quick. Okay, so if we go to one of these materials, you can see that one's already set. And some of these I did leave it at 0, but it will go through all of your materials in any scene, and it will, if this is on, it will knock them down to the settings you have in here. Now that's really, really helpful when you have a gigantic scene with hundreds of textures and you're trying to manage this whole scene. For the most part, knocking it down to 7 is going to work just fine unless you have a dark material or you have blurry reflections. So what I've been using it for is turning this on, letting SolidRocks go through and force everything down to 7. Then I turn it off, and then I go through just the important materials, sometimes like floors or dark metal or whatever it is, and then I set those sampling rates higher to whatever is necessary to get it done. 16, 24, whatever you need to get that render looking good and smooth. That's what I do. And so it's a good way to kind of, again, dump everything down to a bare minimum and then go in and concentrate on the problematic areas. And it makes a huge difference in rendering time for sure, as you can imagine, having everything drop down to 7 versus 16 or 24. Okay, so basically that is all of our interworkings here. What I want to do now is I want to look at the renders afterwards between the settings that I normally use versus the settings in here, because there's been a lot lately on gamma control and how to use it with V-Ray, and I certainly was getting used to it in one aspect, and that's when it comes to using don't affect colors. And this SolidRocks does not use that method. So I just want to look at quickly what that means. So I have 2 of the renders here that I want to look at and compare. So this is the SolidRocks render, and it's important to mention this took about 4 minutes, and then the way that I do it, using brute force, took double the time. It took 8 to 9 minutes to render this. And you can see it's also darker. So let's take this top image for a minute, just so we're kind of looking at the same thing. And let's give it the same gamma control as the one below it. Okay, so now it's a little bit easier to see the differences between the two. So, if we're going to nitpick here and look at some things, let's look at right in here. Okay, so you can see that both of them, this is solid rocks, and this is brute force. You can see that brute force automatically has some more detailing in it. Part of the reason why it takes so much longer. You can see brute force has some more defined shadows here. You can see we lose a little bit of contrast in there. Alright. You can see other things look a little bit different here. But mostly, look at the solution on the ceiling. You can see how brute force method has a lot of splotchiness. Now, we can control that and make that smoother. However, we're already at double the render time of solid rocks. If I make the necessary adjustments using brute force to smooth this all out, I'm going to go way beyond double the frame time. I'm going to get it up to several hours a frame in this case to smooth that out properly. And it's because brute force is going in and figuring out on every single frame what the solution should be that will be rock solid for an animation. So there's just too much going on there for it to handle on an interior situation. So even though there are some minuses in terms of contrast when it comes to brute force versus the light cache method, the increase that you get in speed and quality I think is far worth it. And it's important to point out too that these solid rocks renders that I'm comparing it to are not at production level. These were at good quality. So I could greatly enhance the detail level and the shadow level and get something closer to the brute force as I step up the quality level in solid rocks. And just to reiterate that, I'm using, for the render that you see here in Photoshop, that's the brute force. This render was done on this setting, good. So if I would have stepped it up to production or even ultra, I would get something much, much closer to the brute force. Okay, and we'll look at the same thing here. Same kind of thing. Let's add some gamma there. Oops. Exposure. Alright. Okay, same kind of thing. You can see there's a bit of a difference in contrast and there's a bit of difference in detailing. But I can get that detail back. And then of course, when this file is straight out of Max, so you would always want to do a little bit of, I gotta change this to 16-bit. You would always want to do a little brightness, contrast, and whatever else you do, curves and what have you. So I can easily add in a little bit more contrast, maybe pull down the brightness just a little bit. Because they are 16-bit images, you have a lot more range from which to work. So you can see now I'm getting a really nice image out of that solid rocks render. Alright, so there is just a quick walkthrough, even though it wasn't that quick at all. And on our next video, what we're going to look at is how we can get an animation out of solid rocks. So I hope this was helpful, and we will talk to you soon.